Welcome to the Holding Time podcast. Here we discuss breastfeeding in all its complexity, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you are expectant, a new mother, or simply interested, I hope you'll appreciate the incredible warrior women featured in this series. In this mini-series, we go back to feature some mothers who helped to shape the Holding Time project in Coventry. These interviews took place over Zoom in 2020, quite often under lockdown. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Find out more by visiting holdingtime.org or support us on our Patreon channel, Holding Time.
Are you having
There you
a baby there?
No milk? Yeah, she's having
I
milk.
didn't realise you were a peer support mentor. That's amazing.
Yeah, I haven't done it with Coventry and for feeding teams for a while, only because I saw you at the big Latchon event, didn't I? And I did carry on helping where I could. Obviously, I had to take this one with me, and it became a bit difficult because she's quite boisterous as well. I had to look after her and try and support mum. And then I became ill because I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
It's a hereditary condition, but my first cousin has it, and she's had it since she was 15. But for me, when Devani was 11 months old, I suddenly started to lose basically half blood and blood, diarrhea, mucus, all that. Yeah, I had stomach cramps. Things weren't right, and obviously went to the doctors. They were pretty good, actually. They did the test, and because I was a breastfeeding mother, I was scared about that because I've had a bad experience with a GP before where they basically just tell you to stop breastfeeding because, well, your child is nearly one or whatever. But I was very lucky that they actually listened to me and listened to the fact that I wanted to carry on breastfeeding until at least 2 years and beyond, ideally. And they actually persuaded the gastroenterologist at the hospital to do a colonoscopy within a fortnight. And yeah, from there onwards, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and put on to medication.
So what sort of drugs do they give you for that?
So basically, because it was quite, they classed it as moderate to severe inflammation of basically like the colon area. It's inflammatory bowel disease, and it's one of two. You can have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. One can take the other. I could eventually be diagnosed with Crohn's. I really hope not, because that means that I could be prone to inflammation all the way up the digestive tract from mouth.
Seems really bad, Crohn's.
But for now, it's ulcerative colitis, and hopefully it won't go any further. Initially, I was put on mesalazine, which just works solely in the gut, but also prednisolone, which is the steroid-based. Like, people go for natural remedies, and there's like certain diets, and I tried it too, where I basically ended up cutting out different foods. It didn't really help me in the end. It was things like anything with gluten in it, sugar, potatoes, many carbohydrates. I'm replacing it with things like butternut squash instead of potato, and fibre that's the class of soluble, so it's easier for the body to digest, because raw foods can actually be a problem as well when you're severely inflamed. But in the end, for me, I think it's the medication that is helping to keep things under control. And I felt less shame, because I think with some people, I found that it was almost like it was all diet based. And that's what must be causing it, but it's not. It's actually hormone changes can be a big part of this, and that's why many breastfeeding mothers or women who are pregnant and then breastfeeding are affected with ulcerative colitis or probably Crohn's, and that's when they flare with the hormone fluctuations. Some women are good in pregnancy, and then the flare comes on maybe 3 months after they've given birth, or not long after. But for me, they said it was a bit strange, but I lasted until she was about 11 months. So the issue that I had is going back to the medication. I had really bad insomnia because I'd already researched it, and I knew that it was the breastfeeding compatible medication. I was all for taking it if it would help stem the bleeding. I didn't know about the Mesalazine initially, but I knew already that because of the Breastfeeding Network, and they have so many information fact sheets. I don't know, do you know that?
I know of Wendy.
So she's got the breastfeeding and medication page. She wrote most of the information fact sheets for the Breastfeeding Network anyway. And then I think she's got her own website with additional fact sheets and information as well. She's written some books. I've got 2 of her books now, which are really helpful. And it was actually because I went through breastfeeding support. Anne-Marie, basically, she's a breastfeeding counsellor. I went to her for some support, and she basically informed me that I can actually contact Wendy Jones directly through her website and ask her about any medication that I wanted to ask her about. And she actually did give me additional information about the Mesalazine and the prednisolone. And said she runs a private support group for via Facebook for mothers, breastfeeding mothers who have inflammatory bowel disease. And asked if I wanted to join. So I felt really lucky, and oh my God, it's been amazing to have that support and to give the support back. So obviously I have got peer support training. So in some sense, I've been able to help other mums on that group, because we don't just support each other in relation to the inflammatory bowel disease issues. Obviously, breastfeeding issues come into it as well, and for some women, pregnancy, because they could be flaring in pregnancy. So, it's been a godsend. What I found is I received lots of information about other women's experiences. So I know now that I will need to slowly wean my daughter if I don't want to continue breastfeeding, let herself wean. We're already she'll be at 3 years in March. But let's just say within the next year, once she hits 3, I wanted to wean her off by the time she's 4. I know that I would need to do it slowly. And I know that more than likely I will still flare at some point. And that if I decided just to wean her off quite suddenly, I'm probably going to end up having a severe inflammation flare up. So I think I'm going to just go slow, because I have my good days and bad days with breastfeeding. She's quite boisterous. She can latch on and pull off yoga moves, honestly, while latched on. And then she constantly switches sides. She's a nipple twiddler as well. So it is really, I have my good days and bad days with it all. And she's also quite a high needs baby. So I looked into high needs babies, and they basically breastfeed very frequently, and they can breastfeed for quite a long time. And that's her, I think, all over. I don't know how many times in a day we see at night. It's a lot. The only way I can get away with not feeding her is actually to have her be looked after by somebody else, and that's rare. So it can get a bit much. I guess at some point I will go back into paid employment. I prefer to call it paid employment, because for a long time I think I did feel a bit ashamed that I wasn't working, because people can make you feel like that.
It's a very good point.
Stay-at-home motherhood, or even stay-at-home parenthood, because I have had a male cousin who for a while was at home looking after his children because he was out of a job whilst his wife worked, and he was shamed for it. So it's not just stay-at-home mothers that are shamed for it. But I do feel like this society doesn't really respect or appreciate stay-at-home parenting anymore.
Did you have family around you that could support you in early motherhood? Was your mum or dad in Coventry as well? Obviously didn't grow up in Coventry, so no, are they all in the Northwest?
So my family, certainly my dad's side, they're all in the Northwest. My sister actually lives in Solihull, so we see each other every so often on a daily basis. I've only really, my husband's family are in Coventry, but my mother-in-law was still working when I had the older 2 children. And to be honest, not everybody wants to do the full-time grandparent role, if that makes sense. So she didn't really want to look after my son, because I actually was quite happy for him to not be in nursery initially and to be looked after by a grandparent, because that's how I was raised. My mum and my auntie, my dad's brother's wife, they both went back to work, but my grandparents looked after myself, my sister and my cousins during the day, and dropped us to school and picked us up. But not the same. So that's where I decided that it was best that I left my paid role and I guess just did what I had to do really for my children.
You mentioned about being of Gujarati descent. Your family has a sort of not unbroken connection, but a very much fragmented connection to their roots in the sense of moving to Africa, moving back to India, and then moving to England. And so how much do you think that's affected the traditions of breastfeeding that would be, I would imagine, really, really strong in your community, in the villages in India?
Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, I think my grandma, particularly my dad's mum, they have this idea, it's probably a prejudice in itself, that those that went from India to Africa, to the African countries, and then came to England were slightly superior because I think they were more adaptable to change. I think that's where my grandma's thought process was when it came to us, her granddaughters being married off, if you like, to other Gujarati families. And those that maybe didn't take that path were perhaps not as modern. So if you think about maybe even things like pregnancy, motherhood, all the other practices around that, I guess there would have been some differences maybe between those that were in Africa to India. But I think that because they were still within their own little cliques at that point, I think they still tried to do what they could, maintain the traditions of India, if you like, whilst they were still in Africa. As far as I'm aware, when I listened to my grandma talk, they even there they had someone from the family or the community. You want some more milk? When a woman gave birth, because we would have the whole 40 days of rest, kind of postpartum period where you were expected to rest and basically breastfeed and eat lots of special foods that they make. And also because you would be resting and maybe not expected to move about too much, they would always have somebody come and massage that mother every day and also bathe the baby and massage the baby for the mother.
To say, it just sounds like heaven.
Yeah, compared to what's happening now. Yeah. And I think sometimes I feel like in my generation now, we don't appreciate that postpartum period. There's quite a bit disrespectful. We're like, oh, I just want to get out of the house. But actually, it was actually meant to, as a way of looking after the mother and helping the mother to feed her baby, really. In Africa, those practices were still quite common, as long as somebody was there that knew the practices and could support them. I think they came here and things were different for my mum's generation then. And even though I guess my grandma's generation, they probably did try to influence my mum's generation, I think by then formula milk was being advertised as being better for babies, or that was the impression that they were given. So basically, most of my mother's generation, as far as I'm aware, they didn't really breastfeed for long at all. So, but they still did the postpartum period and still had all the special, all the special foods. They still had the diet and all of that. They just didn't actually feed their babies at the breast.
I mean, I suppose some of it's to do with where they gave birth and the hospital set up, because, I mean, certainly when I was born in the early 70s, I wasn't breastfed, and my mum said it was really difficult to do that. I mean, you weren't allowed to have the baby in the bed with you, and the baby was taken away to a different room, so how would they have managed it? Some of that sort of subtle pressure is part of the pressure to culturally assimilate. So if you're in hospital and you were born in India, but you speak English fluently, but your first generation, as your mother would have been, there is a desire to do what everyone else is doing and to not stand out any more than you already stand out, So they were able to maintain the things that were done in private at home, but there's an element of it being public. And so...
But I also do wonder if, because breasts obviously are sexualized and probably were even back then, and also with the Asian culture, there's obviously all these ideas about I don't know, how you dress and maintaining, like, trying to be more covered. Just wondering if it seemed more convenient to just mix up milk and put it into a bottle and feed. And that's what I find now, that when it comes to, say, special occasions, like where we've got parties and weddings and all the rest of it, you really don't see mums just feeding their babies. I mean, I have now with my family, like my sister and my cousins and everyone, partly because I've encouraged them to do it. Yeah, it's more that there's this stress. I felt it too, that, oh my God, I'm going to need to express and put it into a bottle. That's the only way. That's how my mum used to make me feel. That how are you going to do it in public? And I guess it was just convenient back then. And also this idea that the daughter-in-law will need to still do all the housework. So this way somebody else can feed the baby. And it just, So I think for me, I found that my dad's mum was very supportive of us girls breastfeeding. And I know that she did try to encourage my mum to do it. But I know that my mum's mum hadn't always been as supportive of breastfeeding and has kind of put formula was a good thing. And I think it's because I realised it's down to their own breastfeeding experiences. My grandma, my mum's mum, she had problems with breastfeeding, and therefore she doesn't view formula as a bad thing.
I think it's quite interesting how our generation are turning back towards breastfeeding and what that involves. And I suppose what this project has got deeper into is what that means to us in terms of rediscovering our cultural heritage, you know, and reconnecting with possibly older roots. I mean, when you breastfeed, you kind of feel like you're connecting to your mammalian roots, don't you? You feel like you've become connected to all mammals. It's not just like your grandparents. It's like going back through the entire human history. You feel like this is what women have always done.
So I just going back to my peer support work, because although I really haven't been able to support the feeding team for quite a while, it's always my kind of desire to support mums, mainly I guess in the Asian communities, I should say, really, specifically my own like Gujarati community, and weirdly through like word of mouth and just through supporting family and friends. I have been doing that for quite a while. I just do it via WhatsApp, really. And social media plays a big part. That I do receive, like, I just get a lot of information off Facebook, really, and pages like the Breastfeeding Network, UNICEF, La Leche League, Association of Breastfeeding Mothers, and quite a few pages of some good international certified lactation consultants. And some of the information I share is about our mammalian roots, and basically I always say our caveman days, and how our babies are still the same babies that were around in the caveman days, and that just because we live in a modern society doesn't mean that when they're born their needs are any different or their instincts are any different, and therefore they really ideally do want to just sleep, be carried by their mum or dad as well, have lots of skin to skin, have milk whenever they require it, sleep next to probably their mum in the breast. So that's another thing, the sleep issue that I've found with all three children. But this time round, I've kind of gone with my instincts, and I have like done co-sleeping. I have bed shared safely as best as we can. And I guess soon she'll be 3 years old and we're still breastfeeding. And I know that seems to still be a big issue for many breastfeeding mums. And one of the reasons why some of them give up feeding, they don't want to feed at night.
There's quite a lot of social conditioning, I think. I mean, I'm a mother who, like you, set out to go back to work. I hoped to have childcare or nursery care for my child. I hoped to have that baby in a cot from, well, actually, this is all pre-birth. As soon as she was born, I didn't want to put her in a cot. I could tell that she didn't want to be put down. She was only happy next to me in the bed. So the midwives, said to me, put her on top of the sheets, but, help me to wrap her so she was warm, and I'd be under and she'd be over. And I wasted so much emotional energy worrying about this instead of just trusting my own instinct. I sobbed over it. I cried over it. Yeah. And basically at 10 months, everyone said to me, well, I got her into the cot and she slept okay in the cot. actually, but I was constantly having to get up in the night to feed her. It would wake me up and then I couldn't get back to sleep. It was destroying my sleep. And like you say, your hormones are affecting your sleep patterns anyway. And then at 10 months, everyone was like, oh, she has to go in her own room.
Yeah.
So I put her in her own room because everybody told me to. And then she cried.
Yeah. And then you had to keep going there, back and forth, back and forth.
I feel like mothers are wasting so much energy doing this stuff that makes absolutely no sense in terms of child psychology, human biology, or human development or health. You know, it's and now they're saying, oh, children shouldn't be put in their own room when they're a baby, but there's still people saying, oh no, you have to get them into their own room, or oh, it's going to, you know, have a negative effect on your mind. All this nonsense, you know. And so unfortunately I had a year of trying to get her to sleep in a cot in her own room. I would pass out on the floor. I got so deeply exhausted. And then at the end of it, I finally discovered Dr. Sears, who's like my hero. I discovered attachment parenting. I discovered there was a whole philosophy. This is when she's 1, I discovered there's a philosophy of parenting that makes sense to everything I felt. And then I felt empowered to make my own decisions. And I started co-sleeping and we co-slept for a year and a half until she kind of got her molars and didn't want to breastfeed anymore. And that was it. But the amount, we had to hide it. We when we went to stay with family. They wouldn't understand why I was putting the mattress on the floor. You know, it was just this lack of social, what I would call now social concern around breastfeeding, which is to do with the fact that we have lost those traditions.
So with my son, I breastfed him for 13 months. I felt pregnant when he was a year old again, but you know, my husband was working away quite a lot. So, and I was back at work, and it would have just helped me to just have him in bed with me and to feed. And he was doing that sometimes, but there was only the constant pressure that he shouldn't be. So I was trying to keep him in his cot in the other room and going back and forth, just absolutely shattered. When he was teething, both my older children, they would actually vomit. They would have really major coughs and colds and vomit often at night. So I was pregnant, in early stage of pregnancy, having to deal with breastfeeding and having to deal with like changing him in the night, showering him if necessary on myself, changing bedding and getting to work. And it just wasn't working out. And then I was going through the pregnancy alone, and I'd had to wean him because the doctor told me that he didn't need to have my milk anymore and that he was taking up unnecessary energy for me to breastfeed him. When I didn't know that you can still breastfeed whilst pregnant until the midwife told me, and that we actually tandem feed as well after if they want to. And basically then I had my daughter, and I managed to breastfeed her till she was 23 months. But we did decide not, because my son was already in the other room, which was the nursery. What can I tell you? We decided to keep her cot in our room. We always say to anyone that will listen that it makes such a difference, because it made such a difference with night feeds. And I was happier for it, although I was still having to go to the other room to deal with my son as well, because he was still a baby as well. But it was just easier.
There's all these books that kind of sell you this idea that you can master it. But actually what you come to in the end is the realization that traditionally women have slept with children in one room, and that there is a reason for that. It's because it makes sense.
I had my grandma, my dad's mum, often reminding me of that. She would often check, she'd ask, where is the baby sleeping? And she would be quite disapproving if I'd said in the other room. And then with my daughter, she was in the same room, and she was happy then. And she said, that's how it should be. You should have them next to you. For a long time, I felt quite bitter that everything's because I had the children quite close together. I kind of felt like I wish I could go back and do it all again and do it properly. So for me, it's been quite therapeutic with this one to do things differently, and I guess how I feel it should have been done.
I really relate to what you're saying about wanting to go back. I've only got one child, so I didn't even get to fix it with the next child. And I never got to have that experience of feeling empowered as a mother. I was always on the back foot, feeling like I was an idiot and I didn't know what I was doing, trying to do things that people told me to do and finding they didn't work, and then blaming myself. I feel like women are being sort of culturally stigmatized into behaving as mothers in ways that are unnatural to them. And they feel they have to, because there's like this sort of peer pressure of all the other mothers who've gone through that torture, thinking, well, I had to do that, so you have to do it. None of it makes any sense. It's the most idiotic sort of waste of energy, and it's draining women, and it's making them angry. I think it makes them angry. I think some of the anger towards breastfeeding is actually is actually rooted in this type of resentment, because if you never have, like, you had a grandmother who gave you that reassurance that your instincts were correct with what she knew and what traditionally was the way. But if you don't have that, like, because we're so broken from our own traditions, you're sort of lost in this void, and it's being filled by people making so much money out of telling women they're doing it wrong. It's so sad.
So with my peer support work, I do try to give all the relevant information to the mums that I'm supporting in pregnancy. So because that's one of the things that we got taught with the UNICEF peer support work with cognitive feeding team, that if they can give that information to pregnant women, there's a good chance that it will make their breastfeeding journey easier, because when the challenges come, they're already slightly prepared for it. And I think the main thing is so that they know that babies feed for many different reasons. So when they're frequently feeding, it might not be because they're hungry necessarily, it's because they need it for many other reasons.
Yeah, I think breastfeeding in a lot of those parenting manuals is seen as the problem, whereas actually what we've lost is the understanding how breastfeeding is the solution in so many issues, and many of them issues that we can't necessarily see or diagnose. That's the thing that I think where breastfeeding has fallen between two stools, because we live in quite a scientific positivist society where if you can't see it and you can't prove it, then it can't be true. But actually there's a great deal that we don't know about breastfeeding, and because there's so little research. And actually, unfortunately, a lot of the research is funded by formula companies, so it's all skewed. So when you start to really look into breastfeeding, then you start to understand it's absolutely integral to child behaviour, child development. But unfortunately, although that knowledge is there in universities, it's not filtering into society.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone involved, our funders, the infant feeding team and University Hospital Coventry and Warwick for their support, along with all the amazing mothers and partners who helped to make this project happen. You can learn more about the project by visiting holdingtime.org and support us on our Patreon channel. There's a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of our content.